Do not ask me to forgive a walker. Clara Whitmore said it without raising her voice, and that was what made the whole yard go still. Ethan Walker stood on the other side of the broken orchard fence with his hat in one hand and a coil of wire in the other, looking at the place where 3 boards had sagged loose and where the north gate had not closed properly in 10 years. He did not answer her right away. He only looked at the fence, then at the old apple trees beyond it, their limbs thin from too many hard seasons and too little help. The Whitmore place sat at the edge of town, close enough for people to see trouble and far enough for them to pretend they had not. Clara had learned that distance well. She had kept the house standing, the stove fed, and her younger brother's children in shoes after their parents died of fever, but the orchard had been slipping from her hands one winter at a time. A woman could mend a dress by lamplight. She could stretch flour with cornmeal and make supper look fuller than it was. She could stand in a doorway and keep her face steady while neighbors looked at the Walker name and remembered debt, loss, and a father who had walked away from what he had broken. But she could not lift a whole fence line alone. Ethan set the coil of wire beside the gatepost. He did not step through. That mattered, though Clara did not let her face show it. He was 34, broad through the shoulders, with carpenter's hands and dust on his cuffs from the road west of town. People had said he had been gone 7 years. Some said railroad work. Some said cattle work. Some said a man left that long because he knew better than to come back. Clara did not care which was true. His father had ruined her father's contract, taken payment for lumber never delivered, and left the Whitmores with an orchard fence half-built and a mortgage that ate every good season after. Ethan looked at the missing boards again. "I am not asking you to forgive me," he said. Then he pulled a hammer from his tool roll and knelt in the dirt outside the fence. Clara stayed on the porch with one hand on the post and the children quiet behind the screen door. He measured the gap, marked the first board, and cut it clean. No speech. No defense. Just the sound of saw teeth moving through pine, steady and patient in the morning air. By noon, one section stood straight. By supper, the gate no longer dragged in the dust. Ethan picked up his tools, left the spare nails in a coffee tin by the post, and walked back toward town without looking at the house for thanks. Clara found the coffee tin still by the gate the next morning, its lid weighted with a flat river stone so the wind would not carry it off. Inside were the spare nails, sorted by length, and a small scrap of paper with the price of the lumber written in a plain hand. Paid. Nothing more. She stood there with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders while the yard woke slowly around her. The children came out one at a time, first Samuel with his suspenders twisted, then little Annie barefoot until Clara sent her back for shoes. They looked at the gate because children always noticed what adults tried not to. Annie pushed it with 2 fingers. It swung clean and shut with a soft wooden click. She smiled before she remembered whose hands had fixed it. Clara saw that, and it troubled her more than the repair itself. By mid-morning, Mrs. Harlan had stopped at the road with a basket of eggs and the kind of face people wore when news had reached them before breakfast. She looked at the straight fence section, then at Clara. "He was at the church shed before sunrise," she said. "Mended the hinge on the charity wagon." Clara took the eggs and gave her 2 jars of apple butter in return, though the pantry could not spare them easily. She did not ask questions. Asking would make it sound as if she cared. Still, when she walked to town after dinner to collect flour, she saw signs of Ethan Walker without seeing him. The general store steps no longer dipped at one corner. The loose board outside the schoolhouse had been replaced. A broken rain barrel behind the mercantile sat upright with a new hoop around it. No one had ordered the work. No one seemed sure how to speak of it. Near the blacksmith shop, 2 men lowered their voices when Clara passed. She kept her chin level and her flour sack against her hip. On the way home, she found Ethan at the roadside culvert below her south pasture, clearing mud and leaves from the stones so spring water could run where it ought to. His coat was folded on the grass. His sleeves were rolled. He had dirt to the elbows and said nothing when she stopped. Water began to thread through the channel, thin at first, then steady. He stepped back only when it moved clean. Clara looked toward the orchard fence, where one repaired section stood against all the rest that still leaned. It was not enough. Not nearly. But it was the first thing in years that had been made better without costing her something. By the third morning, Clara stopped pretending she did not know the sound of Ethan Walker's hammer. It came before the town bell, before the schoolchildren crossed the road, before Mrs. Harlan opened her curtains to collect the day's first rumor. 3 clean strikes. A pause. Then 3 more. Clara stood at the kitchen window with flour on her hands and watched him set a new post where the old corner brace had leaned so long the grass had grown around its failure. Samuel watched too, though he had been told to finish his corn mush. Annie had her chin on the sill. Neither child spoke. Ethan had brought his own boards this time, rough pine stacked neatly in the wagon, and he carried each one as if it mattered where it landed. He dug the post hole deep, measured the line twice, and packed the earth with the flat end of a tamper until the post stood straight without his hand on it. Clara knew good work when she saw it. Her father had taught her that before the ledgers turned sour and the letters from Walker Lumber stopped coming, bad men could own good tools. That was what she told herself. Still, when Samuel slipped out with a water dipper, Clara did not call him back fast enough. The boy crossed the yard carefully, holding the tin cup in both hands. Ethan saw him coming and set the hammer down before taking it, as if accepting water from a child required the same care as setting a beam. He drank, handed the cup back, and nodded once. Samuel stood there a moment longer, looking at the line of new boards. "That one is straighter," he said. Ethan looked at it with him. "It ought to be." That was all. The boy came back with his ears red and nothing in his hands but the empty cup. Clara said nothing. At noon, she left a plate of biscuits on the porch rail where a man working near the fence might find them if he chose. She did not carry them to him. She did not call his name. When she looked again, the plate was empty and washed clean in the water trough, set upside down in the sun. By evening, 12 feet of the orchard fence stood new against the weathered gray of the rest, plain as a fresh bandage on old skin. Ethan gathered the cut ends for kindling, swept the loose nails into his palm, and left the yard tidier than he had found it. Clara watched from the doorway while the children stood beside her, and for the first time she noticed that none of them had stepped back when he passed the gate. The town began to notice the way people notice weather before they admit a storm is coming. A latch worked that had not worked on Monday. A wagon wheel that had leaned outside the church shed sat braced and greased by Wednesday. The schoolhouse steps no longer complained under the children's boots. No one saw Ethan Walker do half of it, but the repairs had his shape to them. Clean cuts. Straight lines. Nothing left for praise. Clara heard about each piece in small ways, over flour, over eggs, over the quiet exchanging of things women carried from one porch to another. She kept her face even and her answers shorter than the questions. At home, the orchard fence gained another length of pine, then another. The new boards did not make the old ones look worse. They made the whole place look as if someone had remembered it was worth saving. That was harder to ignore. On Thursday afternoon, a cold rain came down early and turned the yard dark. Clara went out to pull dry kindling from the shed and found the roof leak already patched with tar paper and 2 narrow boards. Beneath it, the kindling was stacked off the wet ground. On a fresh pallet. She stood in the doorway with rain on her sleeves and looked at the careful work. Not pretty. Useful. The kind of repair a person made when he had thought about what winter would do if no one fixed it first. Samuel came behind her carrying the small milk pail. Did he do that too? Clara looked at the patched roof, then at the orchard fence through the rain, where Ethan was working with his hat brim low and his coat dark across the shoulders. "Finish your chores," she said. Samuel went, but not before she saw him look back. Later, when the rain eased, Annie slipped on the back step and dropped the basket of kindling. Ethan was too far away to reach her quickly, and Clara was already moving, but he set down his hammer and waited where he stood, leaving space for the child to gather herself. Annie sat in the mud, stunned more than hurt. Then she picked up one stick. Then another. Ethan walked over only after she stood, lifted the basket from the ground, and set it on the step without making her feel small. He went back to the fence. That evening, Clara found a narrow strip of scrap wood laid across the slick patch by the steps. No note. No claim. Just a safer place for small feet. She looked at it a long while before carrying supper to the table. When Samuel asked if there was enough to set a plate aside, Clara did not answer at first. Then she took down the blue chipped plate from the shelf, the one her father had used, and placed 2 biscuits on it beside the stove. The blue chipped plate stayed by the stove until the biscuits cooled. Clara noticed that first. Not that Ethan had refused them. Not that he had ignored them. Only that he had not stepped onto the porch while the house was still awake. After the children were in bed and the lamp had been turned low, she heard the smallest sound outside, the soft lift of a plate from wood, then the careful setting down of something else in its place. In the morning, the plate was washed clean and covered with a flour sack to keep the dust off. Beside it lay 2 small hinges, oiled and wrapped in paper, the right size for the pantry door that had been dragging all spring. Clara stood there before sunrise with her hand on the latch and said nothing to the quiet kitchen. That day she did not watch Ethan from the window. She worked. The apple butter needed boiling down, the children needed their lessons checked, and the winter quilt on the frame had 3 torn squares that would not wait. Her hands moved from spoon to slate to needle, each task plain and necessary. When Samuel came in with a split cuff, she mended it while listening to Annie sound out words from the primer. Outside, the hammer kept time with the house. Not loud. Not asking. Just present. Near noon, Clara carried a pail of water to the fence line and set it on the flat stump beside Ethan's tools. She did not speak. He looked at the pail, then at the sun riding high over the orchard, and took his hat off before drinking. The gesture was small enough that no one else would have made anything of it. Clara saw it anyway. Later, she found Samuel kneeling beside Ethan with a handful of nails sorted in his palm, each one turned the same direction. Ethan showed him how to check a board for warp by sighting down the edge. He did not touch the boy's shoulder. He did not crowd him. He let Samuel hold the board badly, then better, then right. When the nail bent, Ethan pulled it free and handed the hammer back. Samuel tried again. By the time Clara called them for dinner, the boy's face had the look of someone who had been trusted with real work. Annie had gathered windfall apples into her apron and left them in a neat pile near the gate. Ethan lifted the smallest one, bruised on one side, and set it on the new fence rail as if it belonged there. After supper, Clara took the pantry hinges from their paper and fixed the door herself. It took longer than it would have taken him. Her first screw went in crooked. She backed it out, steadied her wrist, and tried again. The door swung clean by lamplight. From the yard, through the open window, came the low scrape of Ethan stacking the last of the old boards for firewood. Clara stood with the screwdriver in her hand and looked. From the repaired pantry door to the straightening fence beyond the glass. For the first time, it did not feel like a man had come to take over what was hers. It felt like someone had left room for her to keep standing inside her own life. The next morning, Samuel was waiting by the fence before Ethan arrived, boots planted in the wet grass, hair still rough from sleep, a tin of straight nails held against his chest like something important. Clara saw him from the kitchen and nearly called him back. Then she looked at the pantry door swinging clean on its new hinges and let the words stay where they were. Ethan came up the road with the wagon half full of pine rails and a sack of feed he had picked up from the mercantile because the storekeeper had mentioned the Whitmore account was running thin. He set the sack by the barn, not the porch, where it would not look like charity. Clara noticed that too. She noticed too much now. Samuel handed him the tin without speaking. Ethan took one nail, checked it, and handed the tin back as if the boy had brought exactly what was needed. Work began in the pale morning light. Clara kneaded dough at the table while Annie pressed apple slices into a pan, and through the open window came the sounds of a yard settling into a rhythm that had not belonged there before. Hammer. Saw. Samuel's small voice asking once. Ethan's lower voice answering once. No extra words. No showing off. Near midday, Mrs. Harlan stopped at the road and watched long enough for Clara to step outside with flour on her apron. The older woman looked at the new fence, the boy carrying boards, the little girl arranging apples in dough, and Ethan kneeling to tighten a brace. "Your father would have liked seeing that corner straight," she said. Clara looked at the orchard. The words should have hurt more than they did. Instead, they landed softly, like something set down with care. By afternoon, a gusty wind came out of the west and caught Annie's apron from the clothesline, tossing it toward the drainage ditch beyond the yard. Annie ran after it before Clara could warn her about the slick grass. Ethan saw the child slip near the ditch and moved quickly, not loudly. He reached the edge first, planted one boot in the mud, and held out the handle of his hammer for her to grab. Annie caught it, scrambled up, and stood shaking with more fright than harm. Ethan picked up the apron from the weeds, shook the mud from it, and handed it back without a word that would make her cry. Clara crossed the yard and took Annie into her arms. For a moment, all four of them stood near the half-finished fence, wind moving through the apple trees, the new boards bright against the old gray rails. Samuel was the one who broke the quiet. He asked Ethan if he would be back tomorrow. Ethan looked first at Clara, not the boy. He waited. Clara adjusted Annie's shawl, looked at the open stretch still needing repair, and nodded once. It was not welcome. Not yet. But it was no longer refusal. By Friday, the fence had reached the old south corner where the orchard met the pasture, and Clara could see what Ethan had been leaving for last. The post there had split clear down the middle years ago, taking a stretch of wire and two rails with it, and every spring the gap widened a little more. It was where deer slipped in at night and where the children had been told not to play. It was also where Clara's father had once hung the first gate he had built with his own hands. Ethan did not touch it that morning. He unloaded the wagon, sorted the boards, and worked on the line beside it, but he left the broken post standing like a thing that still belonged to someone else. Clara saw the choice in it. After dinner, she took her father's old auger from the barn wall, wiped the handle with her apron, and carried it across the yard. Ethan looked up when her shadow fell over the boards. She set the auger beside the split post. "This one needs doing," she said. He nodded once. Not surprised. Not pleased. Just ready. Samuel came with the nail tin. Annie brought a dipper of water and the last two apples from the cellar, soft at the edges but still good if cut carefully. Clara worked with them. She held the brace while Ethan loosened the wire. She pulled weeds from the old post hole. She showed Samuel where her father had carved a small W into the underside of the gate, hidden from weather and pride alike. The boy touched it with one finger, then stepped back as if he understood enough not to speak. The work took the whole afternoon. The old post came free slow, earth clinging to it in dark cakes, and Clara felt the weight of it when Ethan set it aside instead of tossing it into the scrap pile. A storm gathered over the ridge, the kind that turned the air green and made chickens hurry for shelter. Ethan looked at the sky, then at the open gap. Clara went to the barn and brought a lantern, though daylight had not yet gone. She lit it and hung it on the branch of the nearest apple tree. Then she picked up the tamper and packed the earth around the new post herself, strike by steady strike, while rain began to tap through the leaves. Ethan held the post straight. Samuel held the lantern when the branch started to sway. Annie stood under the porch roof with a quilt around her shoulders, watching. By the time the storm broke properly, the south corner stood firm. Clara carried the old carved gate piece inside and laid it on the mantel instead of in the barn. That evening, when she set supper, she put 4 plates on the table, then paused with her hand on the shelf. After a moment, she took down a 5th. The 5th plate stayed on the table until the gravy cooled around its edges. Ethan did not come in from the storm right away. He stood under the lean-to by the barn, shaking water from his hat, looking toward the house as if a lit window could be a question too large to answer quickly. Clara saw him through the glass and did not wave. She only set the coffee pot back on the stove and left the door unlatched. When he finally stepped inside, he removed his hat before crossing the threshold and stood on the braided rug with rain darkening his sleeves. Samuel made room without being asked. Annie pushed the plate closer to the empty chair. Ethan looked at Clara first. She nodded once. He sat. Supper was quiet in the way first things are quiet. Forks against tin plates. Rain on the roof. The children trying not to stare. Ethan ate what was set before him and said nothing about the chair, or the fire, or the old gate piece drying on the mantel. Afterward, he carried his plate to the wash basin and cleaned it himself. The next morning, trouble came wearing Mr. Harrow's good coat. He rode up from town with a folded paper and 2 men behind him, stopping at the new south corner as if the straight fence offended him. Clara met him in the yard with her shawl pinned tight and her hands empty. Harrow said the old debt had been sold, that the orchard might be claimed before harvest if payment was not made. He spoke politely. That made it worse. Ethan was at the woodpile. He set 1 log down, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked to the gate. He did not stand in front of Clara. He stood beside her. From inside his coat, he took a packet of receipts bound with twine, yellowed at the edges and kept flat with care. He placed them on the fence rail between them. One by one, he showed the lumber payments Clara's father had made, the delivery notes never fulfilled, and the second ledger page in his father's hand that marked the boards as sold twice. Harrow's face changed before his mouth did. Ethan did not accuse him. He only pointed to the dates. Clara looked at the papers, then at the fence he had rebuilt board by board from debt that should never have been hers. The men behind Harrow went quiet. Harrow folded his paper and left with less ceremony than he had arrived. Ethan gathered the receipts, but before he could tie them again, Clara laid her hand over the packet. Not on his hand. On the truth between them. Then she took the papers inside and placed them beside the carved gate piece on the mantel. By the time the first apples colored red on the Whitmore trees, the fence no longer looked new. It looked as if it had always meant to stand there, straight and useful, holding the orchard the way a good hand holds a lantern in the dark. The debt was gone from the courthouse books. Mr. Harrow no longer rode past the place. Neighbors came now with empty baskets and careful smiles, and Clara sold apples from the front gate. With Samuel weighing them on the old scale and Annie tucking the bruised ones aside for sauce. Ethan worked where work needed doing. Some mornings that meant the orchard. Some mornings it meant Mrs. Harlan's woodbox, the schoolhouse pump, or a broken wagon tongue left by the church steps. He still did not say much. The difference was that no one needed him to. On the first cool evening of harvest, Clara carried the carved gate piece from the mantel and set it above the new south post, fastening it with 2 small nails while Ethan held the ladder steady. The hidden W faced the house this time. Not weather. Not the road. Home. Samuel brought out cider in tin cups. Annie carried a plate of biscuits with both hands, solemn with the importance of not dropping them. Clara set 5 places at the kitchen table before anyone asked. When Ethan came in, he paused like he had that first night, but not as long. His chair was already pulled back. His cup was already poured. Outside, the orchard settled under the soft dark, every rail of the fence catching the last thin gold of sunset. Clara looked at the children, at the clean plates, at the papers safe on the mantel beside the lamp, then at the man who had not asked to be forgiven and had given her every reason to stop guarding the door. She reached for the bread basket and passed it to him first.